question for Sabit about moral suasion that he discussed. You mentioned that the government may use moral suasion to convince the banks to prop up the exchange rate, but you mentioned that you can also convince the real sector of the economy using moral suasion. Could you maybe explain a little more how do you convince the real sector of the economy? And a related question is, I've heard various theories about why the tenge exchange rate is continuing to be so stable despite apparent loss of confidence and so much talk about devaluation. Is moral suasion involved? Is the government encouraging large companies to sell their dollars by their tenge? Is anything else involved? Oljas mentioned using the pension fund money. I've also heard a theory that money raised from the sovereign bond may be being used. Do you have any insights?
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, we don't have a hard evidence for moral suasion and its application to the real sector. We had some clients who called and asked questions whether they should convert to tenge, and they were asking at the time when everyone was converting to dollars. And these are quasi-sovereign companies. Well, there are some companies which have dollar liabilities and dollar spending, dollar capex spending. So for them, it's not a question of converting because they are already converted. They are very dollar on both sides. There are companies, there is very little scope for the quasi-sovereign, for state-owned companies to convert. And those companies that have the ability and still have a room to exercise their choice between dollar and tenge-denominated deposits. They're not that many, and still they have this discretion. They don't have to listen to the central bank. They would probably have to listen to what their shareholders, which is Samruk Kazakhstan, is telling, but they would still have the responsibility for the foreign exchange loss or for the devaluation, in the case of devaluation. And some companies did register that in February, so that would be their own decision, their own responsibility. So I'm saying that there is a scope for moral suasion of the real sector, but not much. And you mentioned also, and Oljas mentioned pension fund deposits. Well, that's the instrument to affect the commercial banks, those banks which got the deposit, because you get the deposit, that's about 10 years, long-term funding, which is not available in the market. But you also have to forswear the use of any hedging instruments in the market. And the moral suasion has, I believe, also been used to isolate the domestic market from the offshore NDF forward markets, which provides the hedging to the domestic players. This is much larger market, more informed, and the domestic players simply cannot provide the same level of hedging as the international market. So, yeah, yes to all the questions.
I also have a question to Sabit. Maybe then I have a question comes from the fact that I didn't fully understand the idea of the fear of floating. I mean, you just made an excellent case for a free floating currency. The IMF has done so, given the recommendation for Kazakhstan. The National Bank, in its justification of the last evaluation, said they want to move slowly to a freely floating currency. Russia just went ahead with and moved to freely getting the ruble freely floating. So the question is, well, what is actually holding the National Bank here back? Do you have any idea of what it may be?
Yeah. Oh, thank you for this question. I have to admit I don't have the answer. I can only speculate about what they're thinking. And one hypothesis is that they think, they're afraid that as they let the exchange rate float, the currency would sink. The exchange rate would sink. People would abandon, and that's a justified concern. That people would the demonetization would be very high, and that would translate into eventually to pass through into inflation through the devaluation. So probably at the beginning, in the transition period, you would want to control exchange rate to a certain degree. But the more credible instrument to fight the fear of floating is to communicate with the market and explain how the interest rate instruments would maintain the long-term stability of the exchange rate and prices, rather than short-term stability of the exchange rate at the expense of long-term stability of prices.
I have actually several questions for Sabine. I know so little about the internal structure and functioning of the Kazakh economy that I stuck with external factors. But the gems I saw in your presentation came from the stray remarks you made, such as the interest rate goes from 2% sometimes to 100%, or that there are no interest swaps, or that there is a lot of discretion in fiscal policy, or that monetary policy is not rule-based. In this context, when I was looking at figures, I found that $28 billion worth of reserves are with the central bank. And the other figures I found from the World Bank, IMF, CIA Factbook, and so on, indicated about $63 billion in reserves in total. So my first question is it true that there are 28 billion with the central bank, and that, if so, where is the rest? Does it exist? And what is this 76 billion sovereign wealth fund when the total reserves are 63? Where is it? What form is it in? Is it a treasure chest somewhere in which reserves are sitting? In other words, I really don't know the answers to these questions, and that is the perspective from which I'm coming. Could you please elaborate on that?
Do you know where the treasure chest is?
Yeah.
I mean, does it exist? If so, why does this?
No, it doesn't exist in a physical form.
In what
there's
form
no
does it
gold
exist?
there, yeah. It exists in the form of claims against foreign assets. So it's a record somewhere existing in some depository bank, which show that the government of Kazakhstan is the beneficiary of certain papers. It's the owner of certain papers, and if you look at the national fund, that's about 70-something billion dollars, and these are pretty much all in sovereign bonds. Australian, United States, you name it. They are very low interest, very high quality, different currencies, mostly dollars.
So why are they then not counted as part of the reserves? I mean, it is a stock.
They're not counted as part of the reserves. Yes, it is a stock. They're not counted as part of the reserves because they're counted as part of the fiscal instrument, and as they should.
Okay.
Because the market, there is certainly a view in the market that this money could be used by the central bank in the time of balance of payments crisis. And there has been a precedent in 2009 when a certain amount, I don't remember exactly, about 5 billion was converted from, was it 10? Yeah, was converted from the national fund into the reserves. But other than that, no. So it's not automatic. It's a fiscal instrument. Okay, it's a negative debt, basically.
So I don't monopolize the time. If I could just ask a follow-up question. According to my calculations, there's been a approximately 25% drop in price of crude oil, WTI, from $102 a barrel to $77 a barrel today. And 25% of the GDP of RK comes from crude oil exports, 55 billion as opposed out of 225. So 25 times 25 is 625. And 6.25% negative GDP shock is about $14.5 billion annually. Do you think $14.5 billion annually for a couple of 3 years can be provided as fiscal stimulus and expansionary fiscal policy to counteract what would otherwise be a guaranteed recession from the fund or whatever?
It could be provided.
Will it?
Yesterday, I think the decision was made to provide a certain amount.
But that's 15 billion over 3 years. That's 5 billion a year,
Yeah,
not 15 over 1 year.
yeah. More could be provided. I'm not sure if that provision would be justified unless we build the institutions, the mechanisms which ensure the proper use of these funds. And this is what Zhanibek was talking about, that the institutions, that the checks and balances are not there. And the same applies to the fiscal rule, for the transfers. They're not automatic, they're highly discretionary. The quality of spending is very low. There is very little control, especially from the public, on how the spend flows. There is no such thing as appropriations, notion of appropriations, ways and means, things like that, non-existent. Decisions are made by the executive. The legislature is basically a rubber stamp.
Okay, Zhanibek and Kazakhstan wanted to.
And also, actually, I would like to add, you calculated, yes, the drop and the drop in price and in budget spending. Actually, each year, government have approximately $8 billion from national fund. Each year it's transferred from national fund to the Republican budget. And plus this 3 billion per year, yes, during next 3 years. So it will be 11. So actually we have...
Actually, that would not be the calculation. The reason is, this over and above what was going on in previous years, over and above that, there's a negative shock of 14.2 billion.
Okay.
So an extra 14.2 billion would be needed to just equally counteract it. And of course in the hands of the public, not buying aircraft and so on.
Yes, yes. And also I would like to add that there are 15 production share agreements with such companies as TCO, yes, Metal, Steel, and so on and so forth. Actually, contracts is closed to the from eyes of the public, so it's not like disclosed information. I mean, this production share agreements, yes, and actually they. Of course, there is correlation between the price and the budget deficit, but I don't think it's very direct correspondence between the prices, because these production share agreements could have some barriers if oil prices or metal prices will drop, so some another percentage of the corporate income taxes would be paid, or other maybe mechanisms would be employed. So the benefits from the companies could be also increased.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
Answering your question, Professor, just wanted to give you some information, background information on what the National Fund is and how it operates. So National Fund, all the tax proceedings and PSA share of Kazakhstan first goes to National Fund, and then the portion of it goes into the state budget. Okay. So as Sabit said, the portion currently that was set since 2010, afterwards of the crisis, was 8 billion plus minus 15%. And we should understand that in these 3 years, government has every year constantly used these plus 15%. So they didn't use the minimal, they didn't use the average, they used the maximum. Now this maximum is even further increased up to 15 billion.
Ah.
So this 15 billion would be like half of state budget.
Wow.
And this will increase dependency of the state budget because of decreasing tax collection.
And as it is with the state monopoly of the energy sector, there is a very substantial participation of the government in the economy. So there would be a massive amount of crowding out that would already be occurring.
Yes, so if we are talking about the national fund expenditure, investment, where it is, it's not a publicly disclosed information, and we don't see the breakdown in which types of assets and what is the investment income per asset. So this is not open information which applies to the...
So it was not for lack of trying that I didn't find out.
No.
Okay, thank you.
And regarding the possible prospects for funding this gap of 12 to 14
Right,
billion
yeah.
that you identified, well, if we take GDP by the structure of GDP by consumption, we can see that all elements except for government, they are not it also does not allow to increase the consumption from the households. The same for investment, because we see the high dollarization in the economy, and the prospects are not good for the companies to start investing long term, and we don't have banks who would provide long-term investment in tenge. For the exports, we see that terms of trade are deteriorating, mostly because of the oil price, but also because of the cost of production in Kazakhstan has increased enormously over the last decade, and it's becoming less competitive. So we're left only with the government spending that could become a main driver of the economic growth, and that's where my question for both speakers is, how long would you imagine that the government could sustain such model and to keep the dead man alive? Would it be 3 to 5 years?
Okay, let's add the last question. Because we.
If we're talking about the national fund, if you look at figures, then KIMEP says it has international reserves of 76.3 billion. But if you look at Finance Ministry at Chod, it has 16.7 trillion tenge, which is 90-odd billion dollars. So could you please explain where is the difference? Is it some of the assets held in tenge, or where is this 15 billion difference? Thank you.
Can I add one question to Zhenibek? Recently, Deputy of the Majelis, Derikan Nazarbayeva, made a comment about this money being hidden by Nazarbayev University, something. Have you read that? No? That some money is basically hidden from the budget through Nazarbayev University. If you can comment on that. We're watching what's happening to Nazarbayev University. Okay, first. You want to go first?
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sick-man, there was I think it was Tsar Alexander who called Turkey a sick man of Europe sometime, and Jean Mohammed can tell the details. What happened to the sick man back then was that the country went into debt, the Sultan was spending lavishly, and because of those debts, Turkey lost Egypt and some other, eventually some other of its colonies. In Kazakhstan, situation is very different because Kazakhstan is probably one of the top, one of the best, probably positioned countries in the world in terms of fiscal position. I'm not saying this fiscal position is stable, but in number-wise, in terms of it's a net creditor to the rest of the world. And if you look at the reserves and the national fund together, it's way more than the sovereign debt and including even the domestic tenge-denominated debt. And But the quality of the institutions, the quality of macroeconomic decision making is not sufficiently encouraging that you can tell that with all confidence that this is going to last. And if you look at what is called balanced budget price of oil, in the case of Kazakhstan, it's about $85. And I'm talking not about the official budget, but what is called oil budget, which includes the revenues of the national fund, but excludes the transfers.
Okay.
Okay, and that is about $85. With the transfer of additional $3 billion from the national oil fund to the budget, the national oil fund, we believe, at the current prices, is going to decline now. So it has been growing at about $10 billion a year for the last few years, even through the crisis. But if that transfer increases, so that position is going to deteriorate. Not fast, not very much. A lot depends on what's going to happen in the next few years. A lot depends on, we cannot make assumptions based on just 1-2 year observations. And there is very little visibility about how the decisions are being made, and that's the problem. The problem is that I cannot answer your question. Basically, we don't have information to answer this question. But so far, so good. And yes, National Fund does have KZT-denominated assets. This is a history of 2009 when. I think some Kazakh issued certain assets. There was a swap of different bonds during the rescue of PTA Bank. And I'm not sure if it is 15, I think it's closer to 6 billion. Yeah.
How long government could spend, I think, as long as it's needed, because there is no way, like, как это говорится in Russian, позади Москвы отступать некуда, потому что I think that it's like during World War II statement that we have like backwards,
No,
the Moscow, we cannot like go step back, yes. So here's a lot of challenges for the current government, because you know that there are also like kind of like Arabic Spring and such kind of stuff, yes. And that's why the government spends a lot of money for the social security, from one hand. And of course, at present, around $1 billion national fund and reserves available for the national bank. Half of the national fund, not half, I mean like one part of the national fund, it's performs as like stabilization portfolio, and second as saving. So saving invested in this like bonds, stocks, as Sabit said, and stabilization invested in the easy to cash to make a cash funds. Yes, it could be also 10 years, but actually in 2009 when the exchange rate changed, the national fund assets increased by 25%, which means that almost all, like 99.9% of the all assets are in like foreign currencies, not in 10 years. Yes. So actually, yesterday, the day before yesterday, President said that they will be employed 200,000 people in order to construct the roads, infrastructure project, and so on. And actually, on this will be spent additional this $3 billion. Actually, according to the World Bank experts, the hidden economy in Kazakhstan is 30%, like approximately 30-35%. It's very high. and also related to the lack of transparency and accountability, and actually these 200,000 people will be very low profile, yes, like construction persons, which gets a very low salary, a lot of goes to the standards and so on and so forth, even for the buying equipment, which is also foreign, bought from the outside of the country. And actually even these pension funds, which is lent to the banks, also will be distributed to the general public as consumer loans, yes. And if, for instance, household go to buy the TV or refrigerator, of course we don't produce such kind of stuff, yes. And of course the companies like Technodom, Sopak and so on buy it outside from South Korea, from Belarus at least, and so on. So it also pressures the national currency. But I think the government don't have any opportunity, and it's a real challenge. And situation is much more different raised than in 2009, because the factors influence the economy are different. So and actually the other instruments should be used, not the previously adopted, yes, instruments. It's something different. The level and quality of the challenge is different. So, but in any way, the more government spends on the and inject into the economy, it's better. And the really question is how efficient these programs will be, because if it will stay the same, like 30% of each billion out of 3 billions each year goes to the personal pockets of the people, it's not good.
Some people.
For some people.
Okay, we are 10 minutes over time. I withdraw my question about Nazarbayev University. Let's take, you have a quick question?
Very quick comment.
Yeah, very
actually.
quick. Yeah, okay.
It's not a question, I just wanted to comment to Professor Nadeem's and all of
If you can introduce yourself.
My name is Leziza Sabirova. I'm with Asian Development Bank, and I'm just visiting these days in Almaty. So I was very happy to have this chance to listen on these nice presentations. Thank you very much. Very interesting. Just very quick comment. I mean, of course, no doubt that drop in oil price has effect and will have a serious implication for the economy of Kazakhstan, along with other factors like geopolitical and so on. But I think the discussion here today was a little bit more on what should the government do in terms of compensating this drop. And you computed that it's about 14 billion and so on. It's a huge amount of money for Kazakhstan economy. But perhaps we have to take a step back and really look at the bigger picture. It's not just a matter of compensating this amount to restore and not to get into recession. I think there are deeper structural problems, and this drop in oil prices, maybe it's, it's a good thing that can happen to the economy of Kazakhstan. It's a wake-up call for the government, right? And the same happened in 2008, 2009, when prices dropped actually by bigger proportion. And at that time, there were some signs that the government really started to think in terms of structural policies and so on. But then prices went up again, and then it became business as usual, right? Then the situation, was as previous 10 years of growth and so on. What I'm trying to say is that more fundamental things like rule of law, institutional stuff, transparency, competition, what Sabit was today mentioning, rules and checks and all that stuff which we call institutional things, they're so important for the economy. And maybe the attention right now in policy discussion should be not on, where do we get this additional $14.5 billion to inject into the Kazakhstan economy and leave things as they go, or what should be really done to change things structurally. I mean, the fact remains that after 20 years of independence, actually Asian Development Bank, we did a little bit of research on that, and we found that dependency on oil and gas not only decreased, which was a goal, it did not even stay on the same level, it increased sharply. despite all the, numerous action plans, strategies, and whatever, policies, concepts, and plans to diversify the economy. It did not work. We spent so much money, so many funds, so many efforts by domestic consultants, international consultants, and so on to diversify the economy, and yet dependency on oil and gas, not only in terms of state revenues and budget, but overall economy, actually increased. So right now we have the situation when oil price is going down, we are becoming members of Eurasian Economic Union. There are serious difficulties in Russian economy, as we've heard today from speakers. And yesterday we've heard a speech addressed to the nation by the president, which announced a huge spending program. So obviously government is concerned. I mean, there's no doubt. I think government is very much concerned what will happen to the economy next year. So I think it's really great that KIMEP has, and your center has this, brainstorming kind of conferences and opportunities for discussion. And I think we have to shape the discussion in terms of really what to do in terms of structural stuff. How to, we don't have, I don't know, do we have here representatives of private sector? And if you talk to businessmen, especially SMEs or individual entrepreneurs, life is not all that beautiful, right? It's hard and it's getting harder. So that's where the problems are. Institutional stuff, so it's not just a matter of compensating the lost revenues. It's a matter of how to change the whole nature of the economy, how to make it less dependent on oil and gas, and how to stimulate domestic entrepreneurship, how to stop outflow of money, of brains, and so on. So that's just my comment, not a question.
If I could just, in defense of compensation, just a moment, if I might.
15 seconds.
15 seconds. Certainly, without a doubt, structural change and institutional reform is on the cards. But if the GDP of a country declines by 14 billion, going from one year to the next, lives of regular, normal human beings will be left threadbare. Let's not forget that. There is social deprivation, substantial social deprivation. And this time around, we don't have the big spenders, the big countries who have the flexibility to engage in stimulus spending as they did in 2009. Their belts are very tight. So this time around, it is not that the low price will be around only for a year. It's very likely to be around for 2 or 3 years. So those structural reforms will certainly come, but in the meantime, the lives of regular, normal human beings will be left threadbare. So there is a case for compensation also.
Okay.
But your point is well taken.
Yeah, thank you very much for the last one actually comment. I think it's a very good encouragement, and there is definitely a niche for a format where you bring academics and practitioners together, and also public. And you can have brainstorming sessions, discussions of these super important issues. And I want to quote quote a quotation. Actually, I want to use the quotation that my colleague Nikmeta Badildin posted on Facebook recently, that falling oil prices, they enlighten the brains. Svetляет мозги, in Russian it sounds better. So it is definitely a wake-up call and an opportunity that shouldn't be missed, hopefully. So with that, let me thank first of all the excellent speakers who I think enlightened us quite a lot and gave excellent analysis of various issues: falling oil prices, fiscal monitoring, budget spending, and geopolitical factors. And let me also thank you, the audience, for coming here, for joining us today, and for excellent questions and comments. Okay, let's give a round of applause to